The snow on Greyhaven Mountain looked clean enough to hide every mistake. Sergeant Nolan Beckett thought he was answering a routine call about an abandoned snowplow, but his German Shepherd K9, Rook, refused to follow the obvious tracks. Deep in the trees, they found a wounded state trooper who feared the radio more than the cold. She was carrying proof of a weapons route, a local betrayal, and a truth someone wanted buried in the snow. Before the day ended, Nolan would have to choose between control, trust, and the kind of loyalty that does not leave anyone behind. Share your own touching or unforgettable story with an animal you love. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Fresh snow made Greyhaven County look kinder than it was. It lay over the pine branches in soft white shelves, covered the roadside ditches, and filled the spaces between the dark trunks until the whole northern ridge seemed untouched by human trouble. Above it, the Montana sky held a pale blue color that only appeared after a hard night of weather, clean and bright enough to hurt the eyes. Sergeant Nolan Beckett knew better than to trust a beautiful morning. He drove slowly along North Spur Road, with both hands loose on the wheel of his patrol SUV. The tires crackled over packed ice beneath a thin powder of new snow. A line of sunlight flashed across the hood, then vanished as the road curved under taller trees. Beside him, in the rear K9 compartment, Rook sat upright and silent. The German Shepherd's black and tan coat looked almost polished in the cold light. His dark saddle marked his back in a strong, clean shape, and his amber-brown eyes stayed fixed through the windshield, as if he had read the call before Nolan had. The small scar on the edge of his right ear twitched whenever the police radio hissed. Nolan glanced at him in the mirror. "Easy," he said. Rook did not move. That was Rook's way. He did not waste motion. He waited until waiting was no longer useful. Nolan had spent 3 years trying not to admire that about him. The call had come in as nothing special. A state snowplow had been seen sitting crooked off the north road near an old Forest Service maintenance route. Driver missing. Door open. No answer on radio. In winter, that could mean many things in Greyhaven. A stuck vehicle, a broken axle, a worker walking uphill for cell service, or somebody stepping out for 1 minute and learning too late how fast cold could make a bad choice permanent. Still, something in Ellen Rusk's voice had stayed with him. Ellen had been dispatching for the county longer than some deputies had been alive. She did not decorate facts. She trimmed them down until only the necessary bones remained. State unit requested a welfare check through Helena, she had said. Last ping near mile marker 12. Snowplow registered to State Police Support Services. No confirmed officer attached yet. Any crash report? Nolan had asked. Negative. Any weather closure? Negative. Then a small pause. North Ridge has been quiet all morning. Quiet was not always good. Nolan slowed as the road narrowed. The county did not maintain this stretch aggressively unless someone important complained. Snowbanks pressed close on either side, high enough to scrape the lower branches of the pines. Beyond them, the land dipped into a long ravine of stone, deadfall, and old service paths that locals avoided unless they had a reason to be there. His radio popped. Greyhaven 3. Status check. Nolan lifted the mic from his shoulder. 3 is approaching the reported vehicle. North Spur near 12. Visibility clear. Road iced but passable. Ellen answered. Copy. Deputy Rowan is 20 minutes south if you need another unit. Nolan looked again at Rook in the mirror. Tell Felix not to race the mountain. You know he will hear that as permission to race slower. Despite himself, Nolan almost smiled. Then he saw the snowplow. It sat half off the road at an angle, its orange blade buried in a shallow bank. The engine was off. The driver's door hung open. Sunlight shone hard against the windshield, making the inside difficult to see. Nolan parked 30 yards back, angled his SUV toward the road, and let the engine idle. For a moment, he did nothing. Old habit, old guilt, old training. He scanned the tree line first, then the road behind him, then the slope above the plow. Nothing moved except loose snow slipping from a branch. No birds called. No wind pushed through the pines. The whole ridge seemed to be holding its breath. Rook shifted behind him. The sound was small, just claws against the rubber mat, but Nolan heard the tension in it. I see it, Nolan murmured. He stepped out into the cold. It struck his face cleanly, sharp enough to wake every tired nerve. His dark navy patrol jacket creaked as he moved, the badge on his vest catching one brief spark of winter sun. He kept one hand near his duty belt but did not draw his sidearm. Not yet. He opened Rook's door. The dog came out in one smooth movement and landed in the snow without a sound. His black K9 harness stood stark against the white ground. The patch on his side read K9 in block letters, but Nolan had never liked how little that explained him. Rook was not equipment. He was not a replacement. He was not forgiveness. Nolan had spent years calling him the dog, because partner still felt like a word he had not earned. Together they approached the snowplow. The open door creaked faintly. Nolan looked inside. No driver, no obvious damage. A coffee thermos lay on its side in the footwell. A glove sat on the passenger seat. The radio mount above the dash had been broken, not by accident but by force. The microphone cord hung loose, the plastic casing cracked where someone had torn it away. Nolan's jaw tightened. He leaned closer and saw the marks on the steering wheel. Scratches, as if someone had grabbed hard while being pulled out or while trying not to fall. "Ellen," he said into his shoulder mic, voice lower now. "This is 3. Vehicle located. No occupant. Radio equipment appears damaged. Stand by." Static answered him. He waited. "Ellen, copy." The radio crackled. Then her voice came thin and broken. "Copy partial. Say again. Damaged?" Nolan looked toward the ravine. The stone walls north of the road were notorious for eating signals. "Affirmative. I'm investigating around the vehicle." Only static came back. Rook lowered his head to the snow near the driver's side. Nolan saw the blood then. Not much. 3 small drops, dark against the white, already stiffening around the edges in the cold. A few inches away, another mark showed where a boot had dragged sideways. There were footprints leading toward the road shoulder, but they were messy, crossed by other tracks, disturbed by powder falling from the banks. A person could follow those. Rook did not. The dog lifted his head and turned away from the visible trail. He faced the old Forest Service maintenance route. Nolan followed his gaze. The entrance was half hidden by a fallen sign and a drift of snow. A rusted chain hung loose between 2 posts, one of them leaning from frost heave. Beyond it, a narrow path cut into the pines and bent out of sight. Years ago, the route had served a small maintenance shed and an equipment yard. After a spring slide took out part of the slope, the county marked it unsafe and stopped using it. No one had a reason to go there anymore. Rook did. He stepped toward the chain and stopped, body rigid, ears forward, tail still. Nolan felt a familiar heaviness settle in his chest. It was not fear exactly. Fear had heat in it. This was colder. It was the feeling that came before a decision he might have to live with afterward. Procedure was simple. Hold the scene. Wait for backup. Do not go alone into a closed route with poor radio reception and a missing state employee. Procedure had saved lives. Procedure had also arrived too late on a frozen lake 3 winters ago, when another handler had trusted Nolan's call and paid for the seconds Nolan had spent trying to be certain. Rook looked back at him, not impatient, not pleading, just waiting. Nolan saw, for one sharp second, the whistle clipped beside his keys inside his jacket pocket. The old metal whistle had belonged to Rook's first handler. Nolan carried it because he had never known where else to put the weight of it. He keyed his mic again. "Ellen 3, I have possible sign leading toward the old maintenance route off North Spur. I'm requesting backup. If you can read me, send Rowan, but advise caution. Radio may drop in the ravine." A wave of static. Then Ellen's voice, clipped and distant. "Read part. Backup. Rowan. Caution." It would have to be enough. Nolan looked down at Rook. Track slow. Rook moved. They crossed the chain and entered the trees. The world changed within 20 steps. The road disappeared behind them, swallowed by white banks and pine shadows. Snow rose to Nolan's shins in places. Hidden branches snapped under his boots. The old route had narrowed until it was less road than memory, a pale line through dark timber. Rook did not follow the easiest path. He cut left then right, nose low, stopping twice to test the air. Nolan watched him carefully. The dog's alert was not frantic. It was focused, controlled, the way he worked when scent and sound met something urgent. Nolan's breath steamed in front of him. He kept his right hand free and his left near the radio mic. He listened for engines, voices, the metallic tick of equipment cooling in the cold. Nothing came. Only Rook's breathing. Only the soft crush of snow. Nearly half a mile in, the maintenance shed appeared between the trees. It was smaller than Nolan remembered, a low wooden structure with a slanted roof, carrying a heavy load of snow. One wall had sagged inward. Old warning tape, faded nearly white by years of weather, fluttered from a nail near the door. The windows were boarded. A narrow strip of disturbed snow led to the entrance. The door was shut. From the outside, a length of wire had been looped through the handle and fastened around a rusted bracket. But when Nolan tested it, he realized the wire was not the real lock. Something inside held the door tight. Rook moved close, sniffed the gap, and then scratched hard at the lower boards. Once, twice. Then he made a sound Nolan had almost never heard from him. A low, strained whine, not fear, recognition. Nolan crouched near the door. "Sheriff's office," he called. "If anyone is inside, identify yourself." Silence. Then something moved inside the shed. A scrape, a shallow breath. Nolan's pulse slowed, the way it always did when danger became real enough to stop being imagined. He drew his sidearm but kept it angled down. "Greyhaven Sheriff's Office," he said again. "I'm coming in." The door would not open more than 2 inches. Nolan holstered his weapon, braced one boot against the frame, and pulled hard. Old wood cracked. The wire groaned. Something inside snapped loose, and the door burst inward with a dry sound that seemed too loud in the quiet woods. Cold, stale air rolled out. Rook entered first, low and fast, but he did not charge. Nolan stepped in behind him, flashlight up. The beam swept across broken shelves, rusted tools, a stack of old road cones, a cracked plastic fuel can, and finally the far corner. A woman lay there, curled against the wall. For half a second, Nolan's mind refused to make her real. She was too still, too pale against the dark boards and dirty snow tracked across the floor. Then her head moved. She lifted a handgun with both hands, though one arm shook so badly the barrel wandered. "Stay back," she rasped. Nolan froze. The woman wore a dark state police winter jacket torn at the shoulder, the patch on her sleeve smeared with dirt and melting snow. Her face was narrow and drawn, her light brown hair coming loose from a low tie. One side of her jacket was damp and dark near the upper arm. A strip of cloth had been tied around her thigh, but not well. Her lips had gone pale from cold. Her eyes, though, were awake. Hazel, hard and terrified of the wrong thing. Nolan lowered his flashlight slightly, but kept both hands visible. "Sergeant Nolan Beckett, Greyhaven County Sheriff's Office." "Badge," she whispered. Slowly, Nolan turned his vest, enough for her to see the badge and name tag. Her eyes flicked to it, then to his face, then past him to Rook. The dog had stopped 3 feet away from her. He did not growl. He did not bark. His ears were high, his body tense with restraint. Nolan saw the pistol more clearly now, slide locked back, empty. She either did not know or did not care. "You're hurt," he said. "No open channel." Her voice cracked on the words. "Don't call this an over-open channel." Nolan did not ask why. Not yet. The wrong question could push a wounded officer deeper into panic. He slowly crouched, keeping his hands away from his belt. "I already called my dispatcher before I found you. Signal's bad down here." No details went out. Her grip loosened a fraction. "What's your name?" She swallowed. "Marin Cole, State Police." "Trooper Cole, I'm going to help you. That weapon is empty. You know that, right?" For the first time, her eyes changed. Not softer, just more human. She glanced at the handgun, as if noticing its silence only now. Her hands began to tremble harder. Nolan reached out carefully and took the pistol from her without force. He set it aside, far enough away to matter, close enough not to insult her. Rook moved before Nolan gave a command. "Rook," Nolan said quietly. The dog stopped. Marin flinched, but Rook only lowered himself to the floor beside her. Slowly, heavily, he pressed his warm body along her uninjured side and rested his head near her knee. The woman closed her eyes once, not from peace, from the sudden shock of not being alone. Nolan opened his medical pouch. Outside, the snow kept shining as if the morning had done nothing wrong. Inside the shed, with the broken door hanging crooked behind him and his radio hissing uselessly on his shoulder, Nolan finally understood the truth of the call. This was not a missing driver. This was not a winter accident. Someone had taken a state officer off the road, stripped away her voice, left her in the cold, and counted on the mountains to finish what they had started. Nolan pressed a clean dressing against her shoulder and looked once at Rook. The dog did not look back. He kept his amber eyes on Marin, steady and certain, as if he had made the promise before Nolan could speak it. And for the first time in 3 years, Nolan did not correct him. Nolan did not ask Trooper Marin Cole to tell him everything at once. People in shock often tried to explain too much, as if the right sequence of words could hold their body together. He had seen it after rollovers, house calls, winter rescues, and the kind of domestic disputes that left everyone speaking in fragments. The mind searched for order while the body fought to stay awake. So he kept his voice low. "Stay with me, Trooper. One thing at a time." Marin's eyes tracked him with effort. She still looked ready to pull away from him, even with Rook pressed against her side and the empty pistol lying beyond her reach. Her face had a hard, narrow beauty made sharper by cold and exhaustion. A few loose strands of light brown hair clung to her cheek. Her state police jacket had been torn at the shoulder, and one sleeve was stiff with melted snow. Nolan opened his trauma pouch on the shed floor. He had brought it from the SUV years ago out of habit, long before he knew what he was walking into. Greyhaven deputies carried more than citation books and handcuffs in winter. Out here, a patrol stop could turn into a medical call before the ambulance cleared the first hill. "Shoulder first," he said, "then your leg." Marin gave a breath that was almost a laugh. "You always this calm?" "No." He cut the ruined fabric away from her shoulder with trauma shears, careful and quick. The wound was serious, but not the worst thing he had ever seen. The round had passed through soft tissue high on the arm and missed what it could not afford to hit. The cold had slowed some of the bleeding, but it had also begun stealing heat from her core. "You're lucky," Nolan said. Her jaw tightened. "Doesn't feel like luck. It rarely does at first." He packed the wound, pressed a dressing into place, and wrapped the bandage firmly around her upper arm and chest. Marin clenched her teeth but did not cry out. Rook lifted his head once, amber eyes moving from her face to Nolan's hands, then lowered it again as if he had decided the man was doing it correctly. Nolan moved to her thigh next. A strip of cloth had been tied there, probably by Marin herself, but it had slipped loose. The cut was deep enough to matter and messy enough to slow her down, but it was not the kind that ended a walk if treated fast. He cleaned it as well as he could, wrapped it tight, then shook out a silver emergency blanket. "Arms in," he said. "I can still move. I didn't say you couldn't. I'm not a package." "No," Nolan said, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. "You're a patient who's going to argue with me until you pass out." Marin looked at him for a long second. Somewhere beneath the pain and suspicion, a flicker of dry humor almost surfaced. "Fair." The shed creaked around them. Snow slid softly from the roof and fell outside with a muffled thump. The sound made Marin's eyes snap toward the door. Rook felt it before Nolan did. The dog's muscles tightened along Marin's side, not enough to rise, but enough to show he had registered her fear. Nolan paused. "No one's at the door," he said. "You don't know that. I know what he sounds like when someone is." He nodded toward Rook. Marin looked down at the dog. Rook did not look away from the door, but he shifted closer to her ribs, giving her more warmth. For the first time, she did not flinch. Nolan clipped his trauma pouch shut. "Now talk to me. What happened?" Marin swallowed. Her voice came out rough, every sentence costing her. "Task force. State police lead. Federal liaison on paperwork. But mostly state and county cases. Weapons showing up where they shouldn't. Clean rifles. No serials. Too new for street circulation." Nolan watched her eyes, not just her mouth. Shock could twist facts. Fear could sharpen some memories and erase others. Where? Montana, Idaho, Wyoming. Same pattern. Small arrests, rural stops, 1 or 2 guns at a time. Never enough to scare people above us into moving fast. Until the numbers didn't match disposal manifests. Nolan's hand stopped on the radio mic at his shoulder. Marin saw the movement. "Don't," she said. "I'm not transmitting. Open channel is not safe." "You said that already. I'll say it until you believe me." Nolan let his hand drop. Outside, the morning sun lit the cracks in the boarded window with thin white lines. The shed should have felt brighter because of it. Instead, the light only made the shadows harder. "Who were you following?" he asked. Marin closed her eyes briefly. "Gathering the pieces. Vale Timber Logistics." Nolan knew the name before she finished saying it. Everybody in Greyhaven did. Vale trucks hauled timber in the good months and snow equipment in the bad ones. They cleared private roads when the county plows were stretched thin. They lent generators after ice storms. They sponsored high school football banners and delivered food boxes when the senior center lost heat 2 winters ago. Damon Vale shook hands at every public event like he had built the town himself. Nolan did not like how easily the name fit into the room. "They run freight through half the North County," he said. "That's why it worked," Marin replied. She took a shallow breath and continued. "One of their trucks left the main route after midnight. No emergency call attached, no weather reason. I followed at distance. I only needed plates, location, maybe a photo of the transfer point." "Alone?" Her eyes hardened. "I wasn't raiding a compound, Sergeant. I was confirming a route." Nolan accepted the correction with a small nod. "Then they made you, black SUV, no plates, came up too fast behind me. I tried to turn the plow around near the ridge road. Hit ice, slid off. I got out and ran because the radio was already dead. Dead how? They jammed it, or they had already damaged the repeater. I don't know. I fired twice to keep distance. Missed or didn't. Doesn't matter. They caught me near the old route." She looked toward the door as if she could still see them there. "They took my phone, radio, body camera, sidearm. One of them wanted to end it there. Another said no. Said weather would do cleaner work than a reportable scene." Nolan said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence sometimes gave people permission to finish. "They dragged me here," Marin said. "Locked it from inside with wire. Made it look like I crawled in and couldn't get out. I heard one of them say they'd come back when the road cleared. Why didn't they?" Her gaze moved to him. "Maybe you." Nolan glanced toward the broken door. Maybe they had seen his unit coming. Maybe Rook's bark had carried farther than he thought. Maybe someone had called the men away before they finished what they had planned. Maybe the reason did not matter yet. Marin shifted and winced. Nolan reached to steady her, but she caught his wrist with surprising strength. "Only 3 people knew I was on this line. People in your task force? 1 at state, 1 liaison, 1 local logistics contact. You think a cop sold you out. I think I was found too fast. That's not the same thing. It is when you're the one on the floor." The words came with anger, but beneath the anger Nolan heard something more fragile. Not weakness. Betrayal before proof. The terrible loneliness of realizing the system you served might have opened the door behind you. He looked at his badge, dull under a smear of snowmelt on his vest. A badge was only metal until a person gave it meaning. He knew that. He had spent 20 years trying to prove it, and some days still felt like he was starting from nothing. "You don't have to trust the badge right now," he said. "Trust the dog. He found you." Marin's grip on his wrist loosened. For a moment, neither of them moved. Rook turned his head and looked at her. His scarred ear tipped slightly forward. He was close enough that his breath warmed the emergency blanket. He did not ask her for trust. He simply stayed. Marin looked down at him, and something in her expression cracked without breaking. Her voice, when it came, was quieter. "I never liked K9s." Nolan raised an eyebrow. "He'll try not to take that personally. 1 put me on the ground when I was 26. Bad call. Wrong apartment. Nobody apologized until the paperwork made them." Nolan did not defend anyone he had not known. "Rook's made bad calls too," he said. The dog's eyes shifted toward him. Nolan almost smiled despite the cold. "So have I." That was as much confession as he allowed himself. He stood and moved to the doorway. "I'm checking the route back to my unit. Don't move unless the building comes down." "Is that your bedside manner?" "Mountain edition." He gave Rook a small hand signal. "Stay." The dog stayed beside Marin. Nolan stepped out into the hard white light. The woods were still too quiet. He moved low between the pines, keeping the shed behind him and the old route to his left. He did not go far. He only needed a line of sight toward the road. At first, he saw nothing. Then movement flashed between branches near the snowplow. 2 men stood by his patrol SUV. They were dressed for winter work at a glance. Dark jackets, insulated pants, gloves. But winter workers did not move like that around a law enforcement vehicle. One held a compact long gun angled down beside his leg. The other leaned into Nolan's open driver's side area with a flashlight, sweeping the beam across the dashboard and K9 cage. Nolan felt a slow heat rise under his ribs. His unit had not been opened when he left it. The man outside crouched by the front tire. A sharp sound cracked through the trees. small but unmistakable. The tire sagged. A second sound followed. Another tire. Nolan lowered himself behind a pine trunk, breathing through his nose. His vehicle was gone as an option. The road was gone as an option. Anyone coming down North Spur would be seen before they reached the plow. He backed away one step at a time until the shed swallowed him again. Marin read his face before he spoke. "They found your car," she said. "They disabled it." Her eyes closed. "Then they know I'm alive. Maybe. Maybe they're making sure whoever found you can't drive out. That's worse. It's information. That your word for bad news? When bad news is useful." Nolan keyed his radio and turned his shoulder toward the broken door, trying to find the angle the ravine might allow. "Ellen 3, officer down, North Ridge. My unit is compromised. Do not repeat on open channel. Send." Static swallowed him. He adjusted, stepped outside, tried again. "Ellen, do you copy?" "Officer down, North Ridge. Do not put this over open," a burst of sound answered. Ellen's voice came through thin but alive. "Officer down North, repeat." "No open channel." Nolan said, sharper now. "Do not repeat on open channel." The radio died. He waited for it to return. It did not. Inside the dispatch center, miles away, Ellen Rusk sat straighter at her console. Her auburn and silver hair was tucked behind one ear, headset pressed close. One hand already moving toward the private line. She had heard enough words to understand the shape of the emergency. "Officer down, North Ridge. Do not repeat on open channel." Ellen did not announce it across the room. She did not send a county-wide alert that anyone with a scanner could hear. She reached for Sheriff Graham Holt's direct number and wrote Nolan's last known position on a yellow note with a hand that did not shake. Back in the shed, Nolan looked at Marin. "We can't go back to the road." Marin tried to sit taller and failed. "Then where?" "Old Fire Lookout, North Slope. If the emergency radio still has power, it links to the rescue repeater." Her eyes sharpened despite the pain. "Tower 7? You know it? I passed below it last week. Vale trucks used the service road east of there. That confirmed more than Nolan wanted it to." "How far?" she asked. "Too far. That's not a number. 2 miles if the old path holds. More if snow buried the switchbacks." Marin breathed slowly, measuring herself against the distance. "I can walk. Some of it. I said I can walk. And I heard you." Nolan packed what he could into the medical pouch and slung it across his chest. He tightened Marin's leg dressing once more, then helped her shift forward. The first attempt to stand failed. Her knees buckled before she cleared the floor. Rook rose instantly, but Nolan held up one hand. "Again," Marin whispered. "Slow. I hate slow. Then you'll hate surviving." That got the smallest sound from her. Not laughter exactly, but something close enough to matter. On the second attempt, she made it upright. Nolan put her good arm across his shoulders and kept one hand firm at her waist, taking weight without carrying all of it. He could lift her if he had to, but not for miles through snow and broken ground. Better to keep her blood moving. Better to keep her awake. Better to let her remain part of her own rescue. Rook went to the door first. He paused at the threshold. Nose high, ears forward, Nolan watched him. The dog did not growl. Not yet. "Point!" Nolan said softly. Rook stepped into the white morning. Nolan looked once at Marin. "From here on, you tell me what you remember about Vale's route, and I tell you when to stop talking. And if I don't trust you," he adjusted his grip, steady but not gentle enough to lie, "then trust him until you do." Marin looked at Rook's black harness, the scarred ear, the stillness of an animal waiting for 2 damaged humans to catch up. "All right," she said. They left the shed behind. The snow outside was bright enough to make the world look clean. Nolan knew now that it was not. It only covered things until someone cared enough to look closer. Rook moved ahead through the pines, silent and certain. Nolan followed with Marin, leaning hard against him. Each step taking them farther from the road, farther from help, and deeper into a mountain that had just become a trap. They did not go down the mountain. Every sensible instinct in Nolan Beckett wanted to descend. Roads meant help. Town meant people. People meant witnesses, ambulances, radios that reached more than pine bark and stone. But the road behind them had 2 armed men on it, a disabled patrol SUV, and a snowplow that had already been turned into a message. So Nolan led Trooper Marin Cole north. Not quickly, not cleanly, not like the stories people told afterward when they wanted survival to sound graceful. They moved in short, stubborn pieces. Rook went first, black harness cutting through the white woods, head low when the scent mattered and high when the wind shifted. Nolan followed with Marin's good arm braced across his shoulders. She tried to carry her own weight. Sometimes she managed it for 20 yards, sometimes only 5. Each time her knees weakened, Nolan stopped before she fell. He did not tell her she was doing well. People who were truly hurting did not always want encouragement. Sometimes encouragement sounded too much like pity. Instead, he gave her small tasks. Look at that cut in the slope. Logging road or washout. Marin blinked hard, forcing her eyes to focus beyond the pain. Road, old one, too even for a washout. Good, we take it? No, it bends east. Vale trucks would use that if they were moving heavy. Then we stay above it. She nodded once, jaw tight. The morning remained too bright. Sunlight shone off the snow in sheets, turning every shadow blue. The pine trunks rose black and straight around them. Somewhere below, North Spur Road was only a narrow scar through the trees, but Nolan could feel it like a pressure at his back. Marin breathed through her teeth. "You know this ridge?" she asked. "Enough. That means no. That means enough to be worried." She gave a weak sound that might have been approval. Nolan took a length of paracord from his vest and cut a pine branch with his folding knife. He trimmed it fast, wrapped one end for grip, and handed it to her. "Walking stick. I'm not 70. No 70-year-olds usually complain less." She stared at him. A little color had returned to her face, but not enough. The cold had sharpened her features until she looked carved from the same pale light as the snow. Still, she took the stick. "Your bedside manner keeps getting worse. I warned you this was the mountain edition." They moved again. The old route rose through thicker timber. Beneath the snow, frozen ruts marked where logging trucks had once chewed the earth into parallel grooves. Marin noticed them before Nolan did. "There," she said, pointing with the stick. "Wide wheelbase, not county equipment. Vale runs modified haulers with chained rear tires. See how the rut edges are broken wider?" Nolan crouched and brushed snow aside with one gloved hand. She was right. The tracks were old, maybe from before the latest snowfall, but not ancient. The road had been used recently enough for the packed layer beneath to hold its shape. "They shouldn't be up here," he said. "No one looks when a company is useful." Her voice held no bitterness at first, only fact. Then she looked away. "That's how they hide. They make themselves necessary." Nolan understood that more than he wanted to. In small counties, usefulness could become a shield. A man who lent plows, cleared church lots, sponsored school trips, and delivered fuel during storms did not need to threaten people. He only needed them to remember all the times he had shown up when others had not. Damon Vale had built a reputation out of arrival. Now Nolan wondered how many arrivals had been staged. Rook stopped at the crest of a low rise and looked back. Not alarm, instruction. Nolan helped Marin up the last few yards, then guided her beneath a shelf of stone where snow had not fully reached. The overhang gave them a dry pocket just large enough to rest without sitting directly in the drift. Marin lowered herself carefully, breath catching as her injured leg bent. Nolan checked his watch. They had been moving for less than 40 minutes. It felt longer. Too long for the distance covered, not long enough for anyone trustworthy to find them. He pulled a small water bottle from his pouch and handed it to Marin. Small sips. She drank, then lowered the bottle with shaking fingers. "You have kids?" she asked. The question surprised him. It was too personal and too ordinary for where they were. "No." "Wife?" "No." "Ex-wife?" "No." "You always this talkative about yourself?" "Mostly." She leaned her head against the rock, eyes half closed. "I ask questions when I'm trying not to pass out." "Then ask about the weather." "That's worse." Rook stepped into the pocket of shelter and sniffed Marin's coat. She opened one eye. "He's been doing that." Nolan watched. The dog's nose did not go to her bandaged shoulder. It did not linger at her thigh, or the dark places where blood and melted snow had soaked through. Rook pushed his muzzle toward the left side of her chest, just below the outer pocket of her state police jacket. Marin shifted away. "Hey, enough." Rook pushed again, firmer this time. "Rook," Nolan said, not as a correction but as a question. The dog looked at him, then placed one paw lightly against the edge of Marin's coat. Marin frowned. "Is he smelling the wound?" "No." "You sure?" "He knows blood. This is different." Nolan crouched in front of her. "I need to check your pocket." Marin's expression closed immediately. For what? I don't know yet. That's a bad answer. It's the honest one. She hesitated. Suspicion moved across her face like a shadow. Nolan could almost see the argument forming behind her eyes. She had been stripped of her phone, her radio, her body camera, and her weapon. People had touched her gear without consent. Now another officer was asking to search her coat. He did not push. "Your call," he said. Rook kept his paw on the jacket. Marin looked down at him. For some reason, that seemed to matter more than Nolan's badge. "Fine," she said. Slow. Nolan used 2 fingers to open the outer pocket. Empty. He checked the seam around it. Nothing. Then Rook shoved his muzzle lower toward the lining. Nolan felt along the inside stitch and found a tiny, hard shape that did not belong. He cut the lining open with the tip of his knife. A small round device dropped into his palm, no bigger than a coin, dull black, with a tiny recessed light that blinked once before going dark. Marin stared at it. For a moment she did not speak. Then all the blood seemed to leave her face again. "They tagged me. Looks that way. They wanted to see who came." Nolan closed his fingers around the device. "And where we went." Her breathing changed, fast and shallow. "I led them to you." "No," Nolan said. "They put it on you. That doesn't change where they're looking. It changes who's responsible." He stood, walked to the edge of the overhang, and scanned the slope below. Nothing yet. No voices. No movement. Just the impossible brightness of snow and the dark bars of the trees. A narrow creek cut through the ravine below them, its surface sealed under ice except where moving water showed black through cracks. Nolan moved down to it, placed the tracking tag on a flat stone, and smashed it with another rock until the casing split. Then he threw the pieces into the broken water. The current took them under the ice. When he climbed back, Rook was standing. This time, the dog's ears were forward. A faint sound carried up through the trees. Not an engine on a road, a higher whine, fast, light snowmobiles. Marin heard it too. Her mouth tightened. How close? Hard to tell in these trees. Close enough. Nolan looked downslope. The snowmobile sound rose, dipped, then rose again. Whoever was riding knew the old roads. They were not searching randomly. The tag had done its work before he destroyed it. He helped Marin up. "We move. I can. I know." But when she took her first step, her leg nearly failed. Nolan caught her around the waist and held her until the wave passed. This time she did not argue. The whine of the engines grew louder. Nolan looked at the terrain. The old logging track narrowed ahead, squeezed between 2 low rock walls before dropping toward a shallow drainage cut. The gap was not dramatic. No movie cliff. No perfect trap. Just a tight place where a rider would have to slow or commit to a narrow line. A place a mountain deputy noticed because winter taught people to notice small advantages. "We're not outrunning them," Marin said. "No." "You have a plan?" "Half of one." That's becoming a theme. Nolan unclipped a coil of rescue line from his pack. He moved quickly, choosing 2 anchor points, a buried stump on one side of the track and a rock spur on the other. He stretched the line low, not high enough to injure someone badly at speed, but enough to catch a ski or force a bad turn if a rider came through too fast. Marin watched him with wary understanding. "You're trying to slow them. I'm trying to make them make a mistake. That line won't hold long. It only needs to hold once." He covered the line with loose powder and scraped snow over his boot prints as best he could. Then he helped Marin behind a fallen pine where the roots rose in a frozen wall. Rook crouched beside them without being told, body low, eyes fixed on the bend. The first snowmobile appeared as a dark shape between the trees. The rider wore a black helmet and a gray winter jacket with no visible markings. A long gun was strapped across his chest. He came fast, too fast for a trail that had not been maintained in years. Behind him, a second rider slowed at the bend. Smarter, Nolan stayed down. The first rider hit the narrow gap. The hidden line snapped tight against the ski assembly. The machine lurched sideways and plunged off the packed track into the shallow drainage with a heavy thud. Snow burst up around it. The rider flew clear and rolled into the powder. He did not get up right away. The second rider shouted something Nolan could not make out. Nolan moved before the man found a clean angle. He crossed low through the trees, not toward the second rider, but toward the fallen one. The rider groaned, dazed, one glove pawing weakly at his chest strap. Nolan took the long gun first and slid it out of reach. "Don't move," he said, voice flat and official. The man blinked up at him through a cracked visor. He was younger than Nolan expected, maybe mid-30s, with a face reddened by cold and shock. The second rider fired twice into the trees. The sounds cracked through the white woods and sent clumps of snow dropping from branches. Nolan kept low behind the wrecked snowmobile, heart steady, jaw tight. He did not return fire. He had Marin 20 yards behind him and no intention of turning the slope into a contest of ego. Rook barked once, not at the shooter, at Nolan. A warning. Nolan saw the second rider shift left, trying to circle toward the fallen pine where Marin hid. He grabbed the dazed man's radio from his vest, took one spare magazine from a chest pouch, then snatched the recovered long gun by its sling and backed away into the trees. The second rider fired again, but the shot went wide, swallowed by glare and branches. Nolan did not wait to see if the man followed. He returned to Marin, breathing hard now. "Time to go, did you? He'll wake up with a headache and a story. And the other still has a machine, so we don't use the track." Marin looked at the weapon in his hand. "That from him? Yes. You know how to use it? I know how to not need it unless I need it." That seemed to satisfy her more than confidence would have. They moved off the track and into denser timber, where snow lay deeper and the machines would have trouble following. Nolan kept the recovered radio turned low against his chest. Static whispered through it, then clicked as someone transmitted. A man's voice came through, controlled but angry. "Ridge 2 status." No answer. The voice returned. "Ridge 2, report." Marin leaned closer despite herself. Another voice cut in, breathless and farther from the mic. "Contact near the north cut. One down. Unknown officer has the investigator." A pause. Then the first voice came back colder. "Find the investigator. Find the card. No witnesses walking out of that ridge." Marin stopped. The sudden halt almost pulled Nolan off balance. "What?" he whispered. Her face changed. Pain, fear, and memory collided behind her eyes. "The card." "What card?" "I thought they wanted my phone, my camera, the report." "Marin." She looked down at her boots. "I took more than photos." The radio hissed again, but she seemed not to hear it. At the transfer point, there was a manifest sleeve clipped inside the container door. "I photographed it, but I knew they could argue about images. So I took the storage card from the trail camera they were using near the gate. It caught the container numbers. Plates. Faces, maybe. I had seconds." "Where is it?" She swallowed, ashamed and relieved at once. "In my boot." Nolan looked at her snow boot. "The injured leg?" "No left. Under the insole. I forgot after they hit me. I forgot I had it. That may be why you're still alive." Marin looked at him. "Because they didn't find it. Because they still need you." The words landed between them harder than he intended. Rook moved closer to Marin, pressing his shoulder against her knee, as if he felt the temperature drop inside her. She bent slowly, but Nolan stopped her. "Not here. We keep moving until the machines can't hear us." Marin nodded, though the effort of standing still had drained her. They pressed on through the timber, away from the broken track, away from the wrecked snowmobile, away from the men who now knew the rescue had become something worse for them. Nolan could feel the weight of the recovered radio against his vest, and the heavier weight of what Marin had just remembered. A wounded investigator, a hidden card, a trusted local company, a mountain full of white light and nowhere safe to stand. Ahead, Rook found a narrow passage between young pines and slipped through without hesitation. Nolan guided Marin after him. The dog did not look back this time. He did not need to. They were following him now. The cabin was not much of a refuge. It leaned into the hillside as if the mountain had been pushing on it for years, and the old wood had grown tired of resisting. The windows were clouded with frost from the inside. A rusted stove sat cold in one corner, its pipe bent where snow or falling branches had struck it. The floorboards groaned under Nolan's boots, but it had 4 walls. For that moment, 4 walls mattered. Nolan helped Marin down beside the stove, far enough from the door that she could not be seen through the cracked front window. She lowered herself with both hands braced on the floor, her face going pale as the injured leg bent beneath her. Rook came in last. The German shepherd circled once, nose working, then went to the door and stood there until Nolan gave him a quiet hand signal. "Clear enough," Nolan said. Rook seemed to disagree with the word enough. but he crossed the cabin and settled against Marin's side. Marin looked down at him. The dog's black harness was dusted with snow, and little white beads clung to the thick fur around his neck. He gave one deep breath, then pressed closer, offering warmth without asking permission. She did not move away. Nolan noticed, but said nothing. He crouched and checked her shoulder dressing first. It had held. The wrap was darkened in places, but not spreading quickly. Her leg looked worse, only because walking had made it angry. The bandage needed tightening, not replacing. "You're running warm," he said, touching 2 fingers near her jaw. "That's supposed to make me feel special? It's supposed to make you stop pretending you're fine. I stopped pretending when I fell on your shoulder 3 times. 4. She let out a thin breath. "Then I'm improving. I can still count to 3. Nolan tightened the wrap on her thigh and secured it with fresh tape from his pouch. He handed her water and watched until she drank. The recovered radio sat on a broken crate near his knee. He had turned the volume low enough that the cabin would not carry the sound outside, but high enough to catch any transmission. So far, it offered only short bursts of static, and the occasional clipped voice too broken to understand. Marin stared at it as if it might speak her sentence before she did. "The card," Nolan said. She nodded. For a moment she did not move. Nolan understood why. The snow boot on her left foot looked harmless, almost absurdly ordinary after everything that had happened. Yet whatever sat beneath that insole had pulled men into the mountains and turned a clear winter morning into a closed circle. Marin leaned forward, then winced hard. "Let me," Nolan said. "I can do it. You can. But you don't need to prove it to the floorboards." She gave him a look, but she did not argue. He helped her loosen the boot. Her sock was damp with melted snow, and her toes curled from cold when the boot came free. Nolan worked carefully, lifting the insole from the heel. A tiny flat memory card was sealed inside a strip of clear tape. Marin stared at it like a person seeing both hope and trouble in the same small object. "I forgot," she said quietly. "You were injured, freezing, and locked in a shed." "I still forgot. You remembered when it mattered." She looked up at him, and the old suspicion was still there, but weaker now, less certain of itself. Nolan did not have a laptop. He did not have the comfortable tools of an evidence room or the legal order of a task force office. What he had was a small trail camera viewer he kept in his field kit for search and rescue work, useful when checking remote property cameras during missing person calls. It was old, scratched, and slow, but it could read a card. He slid the memory card into the device and waited. The tiny screen lit with a blue-white glow that painted their faces in ghostly color. Rook lifted his head. Nolan selected the first file. A dark road appeared. The image was grainy but clear enough. Snow fell past the lens. A Vail timber logistics truck sat near a chain-link gate, headlights off. The company logo was visible on the door, a dark pine tree inside a circle. Marin leaned closer despite the pain. "That's the east transfer gate," she whispered. The next image showed the rear of a container. Numbers marked its side. A federal inventory seal hung from the latch. Not broken yet, not officially at least. The file after that was a closer shot of a clipboard clipped inside the container door. The angle was poor, but the lines of the manifest were readable in pieces. Nolan scrolled slowly. Marin read under her breath, filling gaps faster than the screen could offer them. Seized property disposal transfer. Batch number. Cross-reference. That's the same lot series from Idaho. Meaning this wasn't random street supply. Someone had access to items before disposal, or during transport. Nolan kept scrolling. Another image. A man in a Vail jacket stood half-turned near the open container. His face was blurred by motion, but his posture showed no hurry. He looked like someone doing a job he had done before. Another frame showed 2 vehicles parked behind the truck. One of them had no plates. Then Nolan stopped. The next photo was not from the transfer gate. It was a photograph page likely captured quickly by Marin before she fled. A schedule. Patrol windows, road checks, unit assignments. At the top was the Greyhaven County Sheriff's Office heading. The cabin seemed to get colder. Marin saw his face change. "What?" Nolan did not answer right away. He zoomed in with his thumb. The schedule showed rural patrol timing for the North Ridge over several nights. It included gaps no civilian company should have known. It listed which deputies usually checked which roads, And when the road east of Tower 7 was normally clear, Marin's voice dropped. That came from your department. Yes. You knew? No. She watched him, searching his face for the first crack of dishonesty. Nolan handed her the viewer. Look at the footer. She studied the bottom of the page. Evidence and Logistics Office, she said. Nolan nodded once. The recovered radio clicked. Both of them froze. Static hissed. Then a voice came through, richer and smoother than the men on the snowmobiles. It carried an irritating calm, the kind of calm that belonged to someone used to giving orders from warm rooms. Ridge units, tighten the north line. She had the card when she ran. If she transferred it, we need to know to whom. Marin's fingers closed around the viewer. Nolan recognized the voice from public events before he recognized it as a threat. Damon Vale had spoken at county fundraisers, winter preparedness meetings, and one memorial luncheon where he stood beside Sheriff Holt and said Greyhaven survived because neighbors took care of neighbors. The radio clicked again. Another voice answered, thinner, strained, familiar in a different way. Damon, this is getting out of hand. Nolan went still. The first voice turned hard. It got out of hand when your schedule failed to stay useful. I gave you road windows. That's all. You gave me enough to build a route, Lieutenant. Don't pretend you don't understand what you sold. Marin looked at Nolan. Lieutenant, Nolan's mouth felt dry. Wade Carver. The name hung in the cabin heavier than the cold. Marin frowned, trying to place it. Local? Greyhaven. Evidence and Logistics. The radio remained quiet for 2 seconds. Then Carver spoke again, lower now. No one was supposed to get hurt. Damon Vale made a sound that was almost a laugh. That is what men say after they take the money. The channel cut into static. Nolan did not move for a long moment. He saw Wade Carver not as a criminal, but as he had always appeared at the office. A thin man with tired eyes, sleeves rolled too neatly, wedding ring always being turned around his finger when paperwork went wrong. Carver had signed the transfer that allowed Rook to remain with Nolan after Rook's first handler left the force. Carver had said, almost kindly, that some dogs did better when they stayed with the last person they still trusted. Nolan had believed him. For years that signature had felt like mercy. Now it sat in his memory with dirt on it. Marin watched Nolan's face, and this time she did not accuse him. She had enough pain to recognize it in someone else. He matters to you, she said. No. The answer came too fast. Rook lifted his head, ears shifting toward Nolan. Marin looked at the dog, then back at him. He signed something for Rook? Nolan's eyes narrowed slightly. You're a good investigator. I'm a tired one. Nolan looked away toward the frosted window. Rook's first handler was injured on a lake rescue. My call, my timing, my mistake. After that, Rook didn't fit where they wanted to put him. Carver handled the paperwork. Let him stay with me. Marin's voice softened without becoming gentle. And you thought that made him decent. I thought it meant he understood consequences. Outside, snow slipped from the roof and broke apart near the door. Marin lowered the trail viewer to her lap. I thought everyone with a badge was a suspect, she said. That was the only way the timing made sense. There is a suspect with a badge. That's not the same as everyone. No. She looked at the frozen boards beneath her boots. I know that now. The admission cost her more than the words suggested. Nolan heard it. Rook seemed to as well, because the dog shifted and set his head lightly against her knee. Marin did not smile, but her hand moved once over the thick fur behind his ear. A careful touch. A first apology, maybe. The radio clicked again. Nolan reached for it, but only fragments came through. North slope, tower route, card cannot leave. Damon Vale's voice returned, clearer for one sentence. If she reaches a state channel with that file, every road we own closes by sunset. Then static. Nolan turned the radio off. Marin looked at him sharply. We need to keep listening. We also need not to broadcast our panic to ourselves. She closed her mouth. Nolan removed the memory card from the viewer, dried it carefully on the inside of his glove, and put it into a small evidence sleeve from his pouch. Then he paused. The obvious place was his vest. The safer place might not be obvious. He looked at Rook. The dog looked back. No, Marin said. Nolan raised an eyebrow. You were thinking about putting it on the dog. I was thinking about options. If they catch him, they won't. You don't know that. No. But he may get through places we cannot. Marin's jaw tightened. He's not a courier. Nolan looked at her then, really looked. A woman who had said she never liked K9s was now defending Rook from being used as equipment. That was the first hopeful thing he had seen all morning. "You're right," he said. Her expression shifted, surprised by the answer. Nolan tucked the evidence sleeve into an inner pocket beneath his vest. "For now, it stays with me." Marin leaned back, exhausted by the argument she had expected and not had. "I hate that for now. So do I." He stood and moved to the window. Through a crack in the frost, the forest shone bright and empty. The beauty of it had become cruel. Every clean branch could hide movement. Every open patch of snow could expose them. "The fire lookout is still our best chance," he said. "Not because it calls anyone magical. Because its emergency set ties into the county rescue repeater. If Ellen caught enough of my last transmission, she'll be watching for anything from that ridge. And state police, if we get a signal, you send the files through a protected channel, or at least enough to prove Vale and Carver are tied to this." Marin tried to push herself up. Her arms trembled before she made it halfway. Nolan stepped toward her. She glared. "Don't." He stopped. She breathed once, twice, then tried again. This time she got one knee under her before her strength failed. Nolan caught her before she hit the floor. She sagged against him, furious at her own body. "You can barely stand," he said. Her face was close to his vest, voice low and rough. "Then don't let me fall." For a second, the cabin held still around them. That was not trust, not fully. But it was the shape trust made before it had enough strength to stand on its own. Nolan adjusted his grip carefully, giving her support without taking her dignity. "I won't." Rook rose before either of them moved toward the door. The German shepherd crossed the cabin and stood at the threshold, facing the white blaze of winter outside. His ears were forward, his scarred right ear catching the light. He did not growl. He did not whine. He simply waited, as if he had understood the decision before the humans admitted it. Nolan looked once around the cabin. There was no safety here, only a pause. He picked up the recovered radio, the trail viewer, and the evidence sleeve pressed beneath his vest. Marin tightened her hand around the pine walking stick. Her face was pale, her breathing uneven, but her eyes had changed. Fear still lived there, pain too, but the blind suspicion had begun to loosen. They stepped out into the snow. Behind them, the cabin remained small and crooked under its white roof, another place that had almost been enough. Ahead, the ridge climbed toward Tower 7. And somewhere beyond the trees, a trusted businessman and a frightened lieutenant were learning that the woman they had left in the cold was still moving. Ellen Rusk did not raise her voice. That was the first rule of dispatch. Panic on one end of a radio could become panic in 3 patrol cars, 2 ambulances, and 1 family kitchen before anyone knew what was true. So when Sergeant Nolan Beckett's broken transmission disappeared into static, Ellen kept her hands steady and her face still. "Officer down, North Ridge." "Do not repeat on open channel." Those words were not enough for a report. They were enough for a decision. The dispatch center in Greyhaven County was small, windowless, and overheated by old equipment. 3 monitors glowed in front of Ellen. A county road map hung on the wall behind her, its corners curling under strips of clear tape. Yellow notes crowded the edges of her desk, each marked with road numbers, repeater names, seasonal closures, and the kind of local shortcuts that never appeared in state manuals. Ellen pulled Nolan's last known location from the vehicle tracker before it went still. North Spur. Mile marker 12. Near the old Forest Service maintenance route. Then she checked the repeater map. North Ridge sat in a bad pocket. Stone walls, thick timber, and a long drop into the ravine. Radio signals went there to lose confidence. She wrote 3 words on a yellow note. Beckett. Officer down. Quiet. Then she picked up the direct office phone, not the radio. Sheriff Graham Holt answered on the second ring. Holt. His voice carried a calm weight, the sound of a man who had spent 30 years learning that trouble did not move faster because people shouted at it. "Sheriff," Ellen said, "I have a partial from Beckett, North Ridge. Possible officer down." He specifically said not to put it on open channel. There was no question in Holt's silence, only adjustment. "What did you hear exactly?" She gave him the words as she had heard them. Nothing added, nothing dressed up. When she finished, the line remained quiet for half a breath. Then Holt said, "Do not tone the county." "I haven't." "Good. Pull Rowan off routine traffic without explaining why. Send him to my office, not north. I want eyes on who reacts before we move." Ellen's fingers paused over the keyboard. That was why Holt had kept the job as long as he had. He did not only think about where trouble was. He thought about who might be listening for it. "I'll call state through the back number," she said. "Ask for a watch commander, not the front desk. And Ellen, yes, keep Carver off this." She looked toward the side office beyond the glass, where Lieutenant Wade Carver's desk sat empty beneath a framed certificate and a dying plant. Her voice lowered. "Understood." Sheriff Holt hung up. Ellen did not breathe easier. She simply moved to the next problem. Out on the mountain, Nolan had no way to know Ellen had heard enough. He only knew the radio had failed again. He led Marin away from the cabin and up a slope that looked peaceful enough to be painted on a Christmas card. Thin snow drifted through sunbeams, bright as powdered glass. Far through the trees, the ridgeline rose blue-white against the sky. It was the kind of morning tourists photographed from heated lodge windows. On foot, with an injured officer leaning against him and armed men somewhere behind them, the beauty felt almost insulting. Rook worked ahead in silence. Nolan had given him no new command. The dog understood the old ones. Point, slow, watch. But Nolan had begun to suspect Rook was working under a rule of his own, not disobedience. Something older than obedience. Do not leave the living. Marin's breathing had changed since the cabin. It was not only pain now. Fever had put a dry edge in her breath, and every uphill step drew more from her than she wanted to admit. Nolan slowed without saying he was slowing for her. She noticed anyway. "If you start walking any gentler, I'm going to feel insulted. I'm conserving oxygen. For both of us. For the conversation." She gave him a tired look. "You always this bad at lying?" "I don't lie, I edit." The corner of her mouth moved, almost a smile. The path they chose was not really a path. It cut above the old logging road through bands of rock and wind-packed snow. Below, the road curved in and out of sight, easier ground that would have saved them time and invited trouble. Nolan could see why Vale's people would prefer it. A truck could pass there without touching the county routes. A snowmobile could make time. A man with a map and confidence could pretend the mountain belonged to him. Marin stopped near a cluster of exposed stones. "Wait." Nolan tightened his grip automatically. "I'm not falling," she said. "You said wait." "I meant look." She pointed with the pine walking stick toward a distant line in the snow below them. A faint depression cut across the slope and disappeared into trees. "Service road? Old skid trail," she said. Vale used them to stage equipment without putting heavy tracks on county roads. They'd run light machines above the main route, then drop down where cameras couldn't see. "You saw that in your investigation?" "I saw pieces. Not the whole picture. No one ever does at first." She glanced at him. "That's supposed to be comforting?" "No, just true." They continued upward. A few minutes later, Rook stopped. It happened so abruptly that Nolan nearly stepped into him. The German shepherd froze with one front paw raised, ears tilted forward, head angled not at the ground but at the slope ahead. Nolan raised his fist. Marin stopped beside him, leaning on the stick. "What is it?" she whispered. Nolan studied the snow ahead. At first he saw nothing but clean powder stretched over a narrow pass between two rock shelves. Then Marin shifted her weight and narrowed her eyes. "There," she said. He followed the line of her gaze. A shallow collapse ran across the snow, too straight to be natural. Not a trench, not a footprint. More like a seam where something underneath had disturbed the surface and been lightly covered. Nolan looked at Rook. The dog did not move forward. Marin's whisper went thin. "That's not an animal trail." "No. If you'd kept walking—" "I didn't." "You almost did." Nolan did not answer. That was worse because it was true. Rook had stopped him. Marin had explained why. Nolan had provided neither first. The realization did not sting his pride as much as it unsettled him. For years, he had built himself around control. Control the scene. Control the dog. Control the timing. Control the risk. But control was only useful when it served the truth. Out here, the truth had come from a dog's refusal and a wounded investigator's eye. Nolan reached into his field kit and took out a small signal mirror, scratched around the edges from years of use. He angled it slowly, catching a slice of sunlight and sending it across the rocks above the suspicious snow line. At first, only glare answered. Then a tiny metallic point flashed back from the upper slope. Not a star, not ice, a barrel or optic. Marin saw Nolan's face change. How many? One that I can see. That means two we can't. Maybe. Don't say maybe like it helps. It keeps me from making promises. A faint sound drifted down from above. Not a voice, not a step. A small clink, metal against stone. Rook's throat vibrated in a low warning. Nolan lowered himself and pulled Marin down behind a rock shelf. The first shot cracked across the slope. Snow kicked up 10 yards below them, powder bursting into the sunlight. The sound echoed hard off the stone, making it difficult to judge distance. Marin flinched but did not cry out. Nolan kept one hand at the back of her jacket and pressed her flat against the rock. "Not moving," he said. "I noticed." Another shot struck a tree behind them, sending bark chips into the snow. Nolan did not raise the recovered rifle. The shooter had height, cover, and patience. Nolan had an injured officer, a dog, and a slope that wanted to funnel them toward the wrong place. A gunfight here was not bravery. It was bad math. He pulled a rescue flare from his vest. Marin saw it. Smoke, color, and confusion. Winds moving west. Then we go east. He struck the flare and threw it uphill, not at the shooter but against the snowfield between them. Red-orange smoke burst into the bright air, violent and unnatural against the white slope. The wind caught it and dragged it sideways in a thick rolling sheet. The shooter fired again. The shot went wide. "Move," Nolan said. He pulled Marin into the lee of the rock shelf. Rook stayed low and close, moving with them through the spreading smoke. The air smelled sharp and chemical. Marin coughed once and swallowed it down. They slipped behind a narrow crack between two stone shoulders. It was not a cave, only a tight fold in the slope, but it gave them cover from above. Another shot struck rock near the opening. Nolan felt the impact through the stone. Marin leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "He's not trying to hit clean," she said. "He's trying to steer." Nolan looked at her. She had gone pale again, but her eyes had sharpened. Pain had lost the argument to pattern recognition. "What?" "The radio," she said. "Before the cabin. They kept talking about North Line and Tower route. They don't need to stop us right here. They need us to choose the fastest way out." "Which is?" She closed her eyes, pulling up a map in her head. "Down through Corbin Ravine. There's an old footbridge, wooden, not maintained." "I know Corbin." "Then you know the bridge is bad." "In summer, yes. In winter it looks solid." Nolan understood then. The shot from above, the faint line in the snow, the pressure from behind. It was not simply an ambush. It was hurting. Vale's men were not trying to win on this slope. They were trying to make fear choose the route for them. Marin's voice was low. "I saw it on the investigation map." Vale marked the ravine as blocked, but there were tracks on both sides. They knew people wouldn't check the span. Nolan looked through the smoke toward the direction he had intended to go 5 minutes earlier. It would have taken them straight toward Corbin Ravine. He had nearly led them into it. Not because he was careless, because he was tired, under pressure, and thinking like the old fire lookout was the only answer. Marin watched him realize it. She did not soften the blow. "You need to stop choosing every route alone." The words found the oldest bruise in him. Nolan looked at Rook, crouched near the gap, ears alive to the mountain. He remembered another cold day, another route chosen too quickly, another handler trusting his timing because Nolan had sounded certain. Certainty had a cost when it was wrong. He looked back at Marin. "You're right." She blinked once as if she had expected resistance and did not know what to do without it. "I am?" "Yes." The smoke thinned. Another shot rang out, farther left now. The shooter was repositioning. Nolan took the recovered radio and turned the volume just high enough to catch voices. A rough whisper came through. "Smoke deployed. They're off the line." Another voice answered, clipped. "Push them east. Ravine will finish it if they don't." Marin's face hardened. Nolan held the radio between them so she could hear. Then he turned it off. "No ravine," he said. "No logging road," Marin replied. "No open slope. No heroic charge." He almost smiled. That one was never on the list. "Good." Rook looked back at them, impatient now. Nolan studied the terrain below through the narrowing veil of smoke. A cluster of young pines grew thick along the eastern edge of the rock shelf. Beyond them, the slope rose instead of dropping. Harder walking, slower, less obvious. "Up and around," he said. We gain elevation, cross behind the shooter, then cut toward Tower 7 from the west ridge. Marin took a careful breath. That adds distance. Yes, my leg hates that. So does the rest of us. Good plan. It's a bad plan with fewer ways to die. Mountain edition again? Exactly. He helped her move. This time, before choosing the first step, he looked at Marin. She looked at the snow. Then he looked at Rook. The dog sniffed the air, turned toward the young pines, and moved. Nolan followed. Not because he had surrendered command. Because command, he was beginning to remember, did not mean walking first. They climbed through the pines with the smoke behind them, and the shooter above, now forced to guess. Twice, shots cracked through the trees, but the sound grew less certain. Branches shook. Snow fell. No one hit them. Marin stumbled once and nearly went down. Nolan caught her, and this time she did not apologize for needing him. "Still with me?" he asked. "Unfortunately. Good. Don't sound so relieved. I edited that out." They kept moving. Below them, hidden by timber, a faint engine revved and faded. Somewhere, Vale's remaining men were repositioning. Somewhere, Ellen and Sheriff Holt were building a response out of scraps of information and private phone calls. Somewhere, Lieutenant Carver was learning whether a man could still call himself trapped after choosing every link in his own chain. But on the slope there were only 3 lives and the next 20 feet of snow. Rook reached the top of the young pine stand first. He paused beneath a rock lip and looked back. The sun had shifted westward. Its light turned the snow gold at the edges and blue in the shadows. The world still looked clean. It had only become harder to believe the lie. Nolan helped Marin up beside him. From that higher angle, far beyond the trees, he saw the fire lookout ridge. Still distant, still possible. Marin saw it too. She leaned heavily on the walking stick, breathing through pain, but her eyes stayed on the ridge. "That's Tower 7, she said. Nolan nodded. This time, he did not say they were going to make it. He had learned better than to spend promises before the mountain allowed them. Instead, he said, "Tell me the safest way there." Marin looked at him. The question changed something. It did not heal the wound in her shoulder or erase the fear in her chest. It did not bring help over the ridge, but it gave her back a piece of herself that the men in the SUV had tried to take. She pointed with the stick. Not the obvious way. Rook stepped in the same direction before she finished. Nolan adjusted his hold under her arm, and together they started toward the west ridge, no longer moving as a rescuer, a victim, and a dog. They moved like a team. By the time they saw Tower 7, Marin Cole had stopped pretending her body belonged to her. It still moved when she forced it to. It still answered with pain when the snow pulled at her boots or the slope tilted under her injured leg. But it no longer felt like something she commanded. It felt borrowed, fragile, and late. Nolan kept one arm around her without making a show of it. He had stopped asking if she needed to rest. He watched the small signs instead. The delay before she answered, the angle of her shoulders, the way her fingers tightened around the pine walking stick whenever her balance began to fail. Rook moved ahead through the trees, then stopped where the ridge opened. The fire lookout stood above them on a white shoulder of mountain, half tower and half cabin, built on heavy timber supports that had weathered decades of wind. Its windows flashed dull gold in the winter sun. A narrow stair climbed to the platform, buried in places under drifted snow. Solar panels, dark and worn, clung to one side of the roof like old scales. Marin lifted her head. "There," she whispered. Nolan followed her gaze. Tower 7. It looked close. That was the mountain's final lie. Nothing on a ridge was as close as it seemed. The last 100 yards took longer than the last half-mile. Nolan had to break trail through a hard crust of snow. Marin stumbled twice and caught herself once. The second time, her knees folded, and Nolan lowered her carefully against a boulder. "No speech," she warned, breathing hard. "I wasn't making one. You were thinking one. I edited it." She closed her eyes. "Good." Rook came back to her and stood close enough for her gloved hand to rest on his shoulder. She did it without seeming to notice. The dog did not move, as if he understood that for the moment his job was not to lead, but to hold her in place. Nolan looked at that hand on Rook's coat. At the beginning of the morning, Marin had watched the dog like he was another risk in a world full of them. Now, half frozen and hunted, she touched him as if his steadiness was one of the few facts left. "We go up slow," Nolan said. "At the top, you sit. You give me the frequencies. I transmit. I give you the access code too, if you remember it." Her eyes opened. "I remember numbers better than faces. That's supposed to reassure me?" "No. Just explaining why I forgot your name twice and not the code." "You never forgot my name. I considered it." He helped her up. Rook led them under the tower's shadow. The stairs complained under Nolan's weight. Snow had packed into the corners, and he had to kick each step clear before Marin placed her boot. The wind was stronger here, moving along the ridge in clean, hard pushes. It carried the smell of pine, cold iron, and distant engine exhaust. Nolan did not like the last one. He looked back through the trees, but the slope below showed only bright snow and blue shadow. They reached the door. It was stiff but not locked. Nolan forced it open with his shoulder, and the cabin gave them a rush of stale air, old dust, and cold wood. Inside, Tower 7 was smaller than memory made it. A metal desk sat against one wall beneath a window. An old emergency radio unit was bolted to the desk, its casing scratched but intact. A battery box rested beneath it. A laminated frequency card hung from a nail. A map of the North Ridge covered the far wall, marked with faded grease-pen lines from fire seasons long past. Nolan guided Marin into the chair. She sank into it with a sound she tried to turn into a breath. Rook went to the door and stood guard. Nolan crossed to the radio. "Please tell me you still work," he muttered. He checked the battery first. Low but alive. The solar panels had given it just enough mercy. He flipped the main switch. The unit hummed weak and uneven, then the dials glowed a tired green. Marin leaned forward. "County Rescue Repeater," she said. "Try Channel 7 first. If it bounces, go State Emergency Interop. Code is 4197, then Unit Verification." Nolan keyed the mic. "Greyhaven Dispatch. Greyhaven Dispatch. This is Sergeant Beckett at Tower 7. Officer wounded. Greyhaven North Ridge. Suspected weapons trafficking. Local channel compromised. Request secure relay to State Police and Sheriff Holt. Do you copy?" Static swallowed the room. He waited. Nothing. He keyed again. "Greyhaven Dispatch. This is Beckett at Tower 7. Officer wounded. Tower 7. Local channel compromised." The radio hissed. Then Ellen Rusk's voice broke through, thin but unmistakable. "Beckett, this is Greyhaven Dispatch. Signal weak but readable. Confirm Tower 7? Nolan closed his eyes for half a second. "Affirm. Tower 7. Trooper Marin Cole injured but conscious. Evidence of weapons diversion. Vale Timber Logistics involved. Lieutenant Carver compromised. Repeat, Carver compromised." A pause. Then Ellen said, "Copy. Sheriff Holt is moving on secure plan. State Police notified. Keep transmitting if able." Marin reached for the mic. Nolan hesitated, then handed it to her. Her hand shook so badly he had to support the cord. "State verification," she said. Voice hoarse but clear enough. "Trooper Marin Cole. Task Force Access 4197. I have digital evidence. Manifest images. Container numbers. Internal patrol schedule. Request protected receiving channel." Static cracked. A new voice came through, deeper and unfamiliar. "Trooper Cole, this is State Watch. We have partial authentication. Stand by for protected relay." Marin let her head fall back against the chair. Nolan took the mic again. The battery indicator flickered. "Don't die now," he said to the radio. Rook growled. Not loud. Not uncertain, Nolan turned. The dog stood at the door, body low, eyes fixed through the narrow window. Outside, a voice called from below the platform. "Sergeant Beckett." It was calm, too calm. Nolan moved to the side window and looked down through a frost-clear corner. Damon Vale stood in the snow below the tower steps. He looked almost exactly as the county knew him. Dark green field jacket, clean gloves, salt and pepper hair neat despite the wind. Even here, with snow around his boots and armed men behind him among the trees, he carried himself like a man arriving at a board meeting he expected to win. Two men flanked him at a distance. Both wore winter gear without company markings. Both watched the tower rather than the view. Damon lifted his face. "Sergeant, you don't know what she's carrying. Walk away, and this stays a misunderstanding." Nolan did not answer. He looked at the radio. The transmit light still glowed faintly. Time. They needed time more than they needed courage. Damon continued, voice rising just enough to reach them. "You're a local officer. This is not your task force. This is not your fight." Marin tried to sit forward. Nolan held up one hand. Damon smiled slightly, as if he could feel movement behind the walls. Trooper Cole is confused, injured, and desperate. I can make sure that is understood. I can make sure your record stays clean. I can make sure no one asks why you brought a wounded woman into an abandoned tower instead of waiting for proper medical care." Marin whispered. "He sounds like he's offering insurance." Nolan kept his eyes on Damon. "He is." The recovered radio on Nolan's vest clicked. A second voice came through thin with panic. "Nolan?" Nolan slowly unclipped it. Marin's expression sharpened. "Carver." "Nolan, listen to me," Lieutenant Wade Carver said. "This has gone too far. Just give them the card. Nobody else needs to get hurt." Nolan keyed the recovered radio, careful to hold it near the emergency unit's open microphone. "Wade, Greyhaven Dispatch can hear you." Silence. Then Carver's breathing. Damon's expression below changed almost imperceptibly. Nolan pressed on. "You gave Vale Patrol windows. I didn't know what he was moving. You gave him the North Ridge schedule. I owed money. He had papers. He had recordings. You don't understand." Marin's voice cut in, raw and furious. "You left me in the snow because you didn't understand?" Carver went silent. Marin pushed herself upright with both hands on the desk. Her face had gone nearly colorless, but anger held her in the chair. "You don't get to call this a mistake because the consequences finally looked back at you." Carver's voice broke. "I never told them to hurt you." "No," she said. "You just gave them the quiet road." Nolan saw Damon turn his head slightly toward one of his men. The man began moving toward the back of the tower. Rook saw it too. The dog barked once, sharp enough to cut through every voice in the room. Nolan crossed to the rear door, a narrow service entry half hidden behind an old storage cabinet. The latch rattled from outside. He shoved the cabinet hard across the floor. It scraped and jammed against the door just as pressure hit from the other side. Rook stood beside him, teeth showing now, but he did not lunge. He held the line. Nolan returned to the radio. "Ellen, if you're recording, mark that admission." Carver provided patrol windows and the North Ridge schedule to Damon Vale. Ellen's voice answered through static. "Recording. Sheriff Holt has it." Damon's calm began to thin. "Sergeant," he called, "you are making a career-ending mistake." Nolan looked out the window. "No, Mr. Vale." That was Carver. Below, Damon's jaw tightened. The battery indicator dipped again. Marin saw it. How much time? Not enough. Protected relay? Nolan adjusted the dial, following her whispered instructions. The radio squealed, then steadied. He took the evidence sleeve from beneath his vest, removed the memory card, and inserted it into the old data adapter attached to the unit. It was slow, painfully slow. A tiny progress bar appeared on the radio's battered display, 7%, 12. Then it stopped. Nolan's hand tightened. "Come on." Marin leaned close, reading the faded instructions beside the port. "Packet size," she said. "Reduce packet size. Old unit can't push full files." Nolan changed the setting. The transfer resumed. Damon's voice lowered outside. "Last chance." Marin looked toward Rook. The dog still held the rear door with Nolan's makeshift barricade. Body tense, scarred ear angled toward footsteps circling below. The transfer reached 31%. Then smoke slipped through the floorboards. At first it was only a smell, old ash, hot dust, burning insulation. Nolan looked down. A gray line curled up from a seam near the stovepipe. Marin's eyes widened. "He's trying to smoke us out." Nolan grabbed the mic. "Ellen, smoke in the structure. We are still transmitting. Repeat, smoke in." The radio cut into a hard burst of static. Battery warning flashed. Rook left the rear door. "Rook, stay." The dog ignored him. Not wildly, not randomly. He crossed to Marin, grabbed the edge of her jacket pocket gently but firmly in his teeth and pulled. Marin gasped. "Rook!" He pulled again, then released and moved to the floor near the far wall. He scratched once at a square of boards half hidden beneath a rolled canvas tarp. Nolan saw the edge then. A hatch. Cold air touched his face from the cracks around it. "Maintenance access," he said. He yanked the tarp aside and found an iron ring. The hatch resisted, swollen by age, then opened with a wooden groan. Beneath it, a narrow ladder dropped into darkness under the tower. Damon's men hit the front steps. The tower shook. Nolan looked at the radio. 58%. Smoke thickened. Marin's voice came low. "Take the card." Nolan stared at the screen. 71. Nolan. 84. The front door slammed under a heavy blow. Rook barked from the hatch. Urgent now. 92. The battery light flickered red. The transfer failed. For one frozen second, no one moved. Then the display changed. Partial data sent. Marin reached for the card with shaking fingers, pulled it free, and looked at Nolan. They have enough to prove the route, not enough to prove everyone. The front door cracked. Nolan took the card. Marin looked at Rook. Then, with a steadiness that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her exhausted body, she slid the card into the small metal tag pocket on Rook's collar beneath his harness strap. Nolan understood what she had done. So did she. The woman who had once recoiled from K9s had just trusted the dog with the one thing keeping her alive. Rook stood very still as her fingers brushed his collar. "Don't lose it," she whispered. Rook gave one low breath. Nolan helped Marin toward the hatch. He went down first, then guided her onto the ladder one painful step at a time. She nearly slipped halfway, but he caught her at the waist and lowered her the rest of the way. Rook came last, dropping lightly into the snow-packed space beneath the tower. Above them, the front door gave way. Smoke rolled over the hatch opening. Nolan pulled Marin under the platform and toward a narrow maintenance chute that sloped down through the rocks. It was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, but cold air flowed from it, clean and sharp. Outside, Damon Vale shouted something Nolan could not make out. The tower filled with smoke behind them. Rook pushed ahead into the chute, then looked back once. Nolan tightened his grip on Marin. "Follow him." This time, neither of them questioned the dog. They slipped into the dark passage beneath Tower 7, carrying one wounded officer, one half-cent signal, and the rest of the truth hidden against Rook's collar. At first, Damon Vale thought the tower had swallowed them. Smoke curled from the seams of Tower 7 and drifted into the clean winter air. It spread under the roofline, pale gray against white snow and blue sky, making the old lookout look like a dying stove left burning on the ridge. From below, it was easy to believe no one had escaped. Damon wanted to believe it. He stood at the base of the tower with his jaw tight and his gloves spotless, watching the door his men had forced open. For the first time that morning, the calm had begun to leave his face. One of his men came down the steps coughing. No one inside. Damon turned slowly. "What do you mean, no one? There's a hatch. Maintenance access under the floor." They went below. For half a second, the businessman mask disappeared completely. What remained was not rage, exactly. It was the blank expression of a man who had spent years arranging the world to obey him and had just been reminded that wood, snow, dogs, and wounded people did not work for him. Then the mask returned. "Back to the logging road," he said. "Now." The second man, a broad-shouldered former security contractor named Lane, hesitated near the tree line. He had a square face reddened by cold and a limp from a bad step on the slope. He was not a man built for doubt, but doubt had found him anyway. "What about the officer?" Damon looked at him. Lane lowered his voice. "If the signal went through." "It did not go through enough," Damon said. "And if it did, we are leaving before the state locks down every road between here and the interstate." "What about Ridge 2? He made his choice when he failed to stand up." That ended the conversation, or it was supposed to. Below the tower, in the narrow maintenance chute cut between rock and old support timbers, Nolan Beckett heard Damon's voice fade away. He stayed still until the footsteps moved down the ridge. Marin leaned against the cold stone wall beside him, eyes half closed, face drained to a color Nolan did not like. Rook stood at the mouth of the chute, snow on his muzzle, listening. The memory card sat hidden beneath the strap at Rook's collar. Nolan could feel the shape of the choice pressing on him. Run for open ground, and maybe they reached a safer line before Damon found them. Stay close, and maybe they bought Sheriff Holt enough time. There was no good option. There rarely was when people were tired enough to confuse urgency with wisdom. Marin opened her eyes. "He's going for the road," she said. "Yes. If he reaches the trucks." "I know. You can't chase him carrying me." "I know that too." Her mouth tightened. "I hate being the reason." Nolan looked at her, then at Rook. "You're not the reason. You're the person." That stopped her, maybe because it was too plain to argue with. He adjusted the recovered radio on his vest, but kept it off. The last thing they needed was a burst of sound under the tower. Above them, smoke kept sliding through gaps in the floorboards. Behind them, the maintenance chute sloped downward toward a drainage path that would eventually meet the old bridge below Tower 7. Nolan knew the bridge. Every deputy in the North District did. In summer, it was a shortcut for hikers who ignored warning signs. In winter, snow made it look stronger than it was. The county had meant to close it properly for years, which meant it had a leaning sign and a chain most people stepped over. He did not want to use it. Damon would. Nolan helped Marin move. They took the chute down slowly, Rook ahead and turning back every few yards to make sure they followed. The passage opened beneath a ledge where snow had collected in deep drifts. The air outside struck colder after the smoke, clean enough to sting. Marin nearly fell when her boot sank too deep. Nolan caught her. "I'm slowing you down," she said. "Yes," she looked at him. He held her gaze. "And we're still moving." There was no comfort in the words, only commitment. They followed Rook along the drainage line until the trees thinned and the old wooden bridge appeared. It crossed a narrow gorge where black water ran between snow-covered rocks. The bridge was not high enough to be dramatic from a distance, but close up it had the quiet danger of rotten things. Snow lay thick over the planks. The side rail on the far end had collapsed inward. A faded sign leaned at an angle near the approach. Undafe Crossing. Damon and his men reached it first. They were halfway across when Nolan saw them through the pines. Damon moved carefully but quickly, one hand on the remaining rail, the other keeping his balance. Lane followed. The third man, younger and nervous, carried a small pack and kept looking behind him. Rook stopped beside Nolan and lowered his head. Marin drew a breath. "Can we go around?" "Not fast enough." "Then he wins." "Not yet." Nolan stepped from the trees with one hand raised, the recovered weapon slung but not aimed. "Vale." Damon stopped on the far half of the bridge. For a moment the whole ridge seemed to freeze around his name. Damon turned. He looked first at Nolan, then at Marin leaning against him, then at Rook. His eyes flicked to the dog's harness, but not long enough. He still believed the card was on Marin. "Sergeant," he called, voice smooth again. "You are persistent. I've been called worse." "I'm sure you have." Damon's gaze moved to Marin. "Trooper Cole, you look like you need medical care. I needed it when your men left me in a shed. My men found you after a crash. That is the story a lawyer can understand." Marin lifted her chin with effort. "Manifest images, container numbers, patrol schedule, Carver's admission, your voice on radio. That is the story a jury can understand." Damon smiled, but it had no warmth left. If anyone lives long enough to authenticate it. Nolan felt Marin's weight shift beside him. She was standing on will now, not strength. Damon's hand moved near his jacket. Nolan spoke before the movement became anything worse. "Don't." Damon paused. From below the bridge came a sharp crack. Not a shot. Wood. The younger man near the rear slipped as one plank gave under his boot. He dropped hard, caught himself against the broken rail, and slid toward the edge. His pack tumbled into the gorge and vanished into the rocks below. The man grabbed a jagged upright with both hands. Snow collapsed around him. "Lane!" he shouted. Lane took one step toward him. Damon snapped, "Leave him!" Lane froze. The younger man stared at Damon as if he had misheard. "Mr. Vale, move," Damon said. Now the bridge groaned beneath all of them. Rook moved. Nolan saw it and almost gave the command. "Heel, stop, stay." The words rose from old training, from fear, from the part of him that had spent years believing control was the only way to keep a dog alive. Then he saw what Rook saw. A man hanging from a failing bridge was still a man. Wrong side, wrong employer, wrong choices, still alive. Rook ran, not toward Damon, toward the man slipping at the broken rail. "Rook," Marin whispered. Nolan did not call him back. He moved after him. The bridge shifted under Nolan's first step. He went low, spreading his weight, one hand on the rail. Rook reached the younger man and clamped his teeth into the back of the man's winter jacket, pulling away from the edge with steady, stubborn force. The man gasped and scrambled for purchase. Damon's face twisted. "Get away from him!" Lane did not move. He watched the dog pull his teammate from the gorge. He watched Nolan grab the man's arm and drag him onto safer boards. He watched Marin, barely able to stand at the bridge entrance, lift the recovered radio from Nolan's vest and press the transmit key with both shaking hands. "Greyhaven Dispatch," Marin said, voice breaking but clear. "This is Trooper Cole at the old bridge below Tower 7. Damon Vale is on scene. One suspect injured. Evidence remains secure. Need medical and tactical response now." Static answered. Then Ellen's voice came through. "Trooper Cole, we copy. "Units are close. Stay low." Damon heard it. Everyone heard it. The younger man Nolan had pulled back rolled onto his side, breathing hard. He looked at Damon with fear giving way to something uglier. He was going to leave me. Damon's eyes hardened. "Shut up." The man looked at Nolan. "His sat phone," he said quickly. "Vale's got the vehicle list on his sat phone. Container codes, too. He kept it off the company system." Damon stepped toward him. Lane finally raised his hand. Enough. It was not a shout. It was worse for Damon. It was refusal. Damon stared at Lane as if betrayal was something only other people committed. "You work for me." Lane looked at the man on the planks, then at Rook standing over him, hackles raised but not attacking. "Not like that." From the far side of the bridge, engines sounded. Not snowmobiles alone, heavier vehicles. Sheriff Graham Holt appeared first between the trees on the logging road, moving with a county winter team, and 2 deputies Nolan trusted on sight. Holt wore his brown winter sheriff jacket and a dark hat pulled low, his face calm and hard beneath the brim. From Nolan's side of the bridge, blue and white state police units broke through the trees near the lower access route. Their arrival was not clean or cinematic. One vehicle nearly slid sideways before correcting. A deputy stumbled in the snow. A medic shouted for room before anyone had fully secured the scene. It looked real. It looked late. It looked like help. Damon stepped back. There was nowhere useful to go. The old bridge held him between the law he had tried to buy and the mountain he had tried to use. Sheriff Holt's voice carried across the gorge. "Damon Vale, keep your hands where I can see them." Damon looked at Nolan once, and whatever friendly mask Greyhaven had known was gone. "You have no idea what you interrupted." Nolan kept one hand on the injured man and the other near Rook's collar. "Yes," he said, "I do." Marin moved onto the bridge, despite Nolan's sharp look. She only took 3 steps. That was all she could manage. A state trooper rushed forward to help, but she lifted one hand, asking for a moment. Her voice was hoarse, thin, and steady. "Damon Vale, you are being detained in connection with weapons diversion, obstruction, and the attempted harm of a law enforcement officer. You have the right to remain silent." She swayed before she finished. Nolan caught her. This time she did not fight it. Holt's deputies secured Damon. State police recovered the satellite phone from his jacket. Lane lowered his hands and knelt without being asked. The younger man, Rook, had helped stayed flat on the bridge, crying quietly into the snow, not from injury alone, but from the shock of still being alive. Snow rescue arrived before the helicopter. That was how mountain emergencies worked. The first medical team came on tracked equipment with orange rescue sleds and hard cases strapped down under bungee cords. A young medic with wind-burned cheeks and a voice too gentle for the weather knelt beside Marin and began checking her vitals. Nolan stepped back only when they made him. Rook did not. The medic looked at the dog, then at Nolan. "He going to let us work?" Nolan looked at Rook. For the first time all day he did not give an order. He said, "Ask him." The medic blinked. Marin, pale on the rescue sled, reached out and touched Rook's head. "He's fine," she whispered. "He's the reason I am." Rook lowered his muzzle against her glove. Before they secured the blanket over her, Marin looked at the dog and said softly, "I was wrong about you." Nolan heard what she meant. Not only about Rook, not only about K9s, about trust, about badges, about who stayed. Rook's collar still held the memory card. Nolan removed it only after state police evidence techs arrived with a sealed bag, and Marin gave a weak nod of permission. By then the ridge had changed. It was still cold, still bright, still dangerous, but it no longer felt like the mountain belonged to Damon Vale. Weeks later, Greyhaven County remained under snow. The investigation did not end in one clean headline. It unfolded the way real things did. Interviews, warrants, sealed filings, late-night calls, and people in offices realizing how much paper could hide when no one wanted to read it closely. Vale Timber Logistics lost its county contracts first, then state contracts. Then federal attention arrived. Damon Vale faced charges tied to weapons diversion, obstruction, and the attempt to silence an investigator. Wade Carver entered a plea and cooperated, giving up routes, dates, and names with the hollow voice of a man discovering that regret did not erase harm. Sheriff Holt ordered an audit of every seized property transport file that had crossed Greyhaven in 5 years. Ellen Rusk framed nothing, celebrated nothing, and kept the yellow note from Nolan's broken transmission taped inside her desk drawer. Nolan Beckett went back to work. That was what people noticed first. He did not give interviews. He did not stand in front of cameras. He did not let anyone call him a hero without changing the subject. He filed reports, fixed gear, answered calls, and showed up at the sheriff's office before sunrise like the mountain had not almost taken him. But something had changed. Everyone saw it in the way he opened the rear door of his patrol SUV. Before, he had let Rook out like a responsibility. Now he waited for him like a partner. The new K-9 search and support program began on a clear morning 2 weeks after Marin left the hospital. It was not a large ceremony. Just Sheriff Holt, a few deputies, Ellen standing in a thick coat with a paper cup of coffee, and a handful of townspeople who had heard enough rumors to understand that the dog beside Nolan had done more than track a scent. Rook wore his black harness, brushed clean, the K-9 patch bright against his side. The scar on his right ear showed in the cold sunlight. Marin arrived with her arm in a sling beneath a gray winter coat. She walked slowly, but she walked without help. Nolan saw her cross the parking lot and felt Rook shift beside him. "He remembers you," Nolan said. Marin looked down at the dog. "I owe him an apology. You gave him the card. That was evidence. This is personal." She crouched carefully, wincing once, and placed her hand on Rook's head. "I was wrong about you," she said again, clearer this time. Rook accepted the apology with the calm dignity of a creature who had never needed it explained. Marin stood and looked at Nolan. "You trusted him before you trusted me." Nolan watched Rook lean lightly against his leg. "He trusted both of us first." A call came in over Ellen's handheld radio then. A missing hiker's family had reported an overdue return near the South Trailhead. Nothing dramatic yet. Nothing certain. Just the beginning of another cold problem that might become worse if the wrong people waited too long. Nolan looked at Sheriff Holt. Holt nodded. Rook was already standing. Nolan opened the SUV door, then paused. For years, he had moved first and expected the dog to follow. That morning, he stepped aside. "Come on, partner," he said. Rook jumped down, landed in the snow, and waited beside him. Not behind, beside. Together they walked toward the waiting road. Two figures crossing a White County yard under a bright winter sky, carrying no promise that the world would be safe, only the harder promise that when someone was out there in the cold, they would go. In the end, this story reminds us that true courage is not always loud, and loyalty is not only proven when it is easy. Sometimes the most important choice is made in a cold, difficult moment, when turning away would be simpler, but staying is the right thing to do. Nolan, Marin, and Rook each learned that trust can be rebuilt one brave decision at a time. And maybe, in our own lives, grace often looks like someone refusing to leave us behind when we are wounded, afraid, or lost. May God give you the strength to stand for what is right, the wisdom to know who to trust, and the heart to help someone who cannot make it alone. If this story touched you, please share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories of courage, loyalty, and hope, please subscribe to the channel.